Finders Keepers is a documentary about two grown men locked in an absurd battle over who owns a specific piece of property. Has anybody seen this one? Yes, Kelsey, correct. Well, the story goes like this. John Wood, he goes on a spin in a small private plane that his family owns. He goes with his dad and his sister and his brother-in-law. And while they're up in the air, they run into issues and the plane crashes. And in the process, John injures his left leg badly enough that the doctors are forced to amputate his leg. Before surgery, John asks if he'll be able to keep the leg, thinking that if he could keep the bones, it might help him remember the crash. So when he returns home after surgery, a mortician drops off his leg. Only instead of it being just the bone, it's the entire amputated limb wrapped in a trash bag. I know. Now, John isn't sure what to do with it. He's only wanting the bone, after all. And I won't get too graphic, but let me just put it this way. He decides in the end to try his hand at mummifying his leg. So you fast forward some months, and he has fallen on hard times. He's addicted to drugs, and he's unable to pay rent. He ends up being evicted. And so he has to move all of his belongings into a storage unit. His mother offers to pay the first 3 months, but then John is responsible for the rest. Because John is lost in his troubles, he ends up failing to take over paying the rent for the storage unit, and he moves off to another state. And the owner of the storage facility auctions off John's storage unit, and sort of similar to an episode of Storage Wars, if you've ever seen that. A man named Shannon buys his unit and all the contents within it. When Shannon gets everything home, he starts unloading it all. And then he opens his newly acquired smoker and he discovers, to his horror, a left foot. So he calls the police and they confiscate what turns out to be John's old leg. But Shannon, who claims he paid for it, fights to keep it, thinking he can capitalize on this curiosity by monetizing visits to his property to see it and then making shirts calling himself the Footman. In his effort to regain the foot, to keep the foot, Shannon says he's invoking the playground rule, typically used for toys and candy and riding the front seat. You might know this one. Finders, keepers, losers, weepers. If you're unfamiliar with the economy of bickering children, it's just a saying kids use when they find something that doesn't belong to them. And then when a kid says, "Hey, that's mine," the kid who found it refuses to return it or share in the spoils. In other words, tough luck. Go deal with it. And then sometimes the kid who lost his toy or snack runs off crying. Finders, keepers, losers, weepers, you see. There's a tough luck kind of ethos underneath these parables that Jesus is deeply criticizing. It's as if the examples he uses are set in a world not that different from our own. Sure, the times and settings and characters may be different, but within the story itself is the assumption that the people of their day still don't like to share. And their expectations are about profit and practicality and the management of risk and reputation. For example, you can survive a 1% loss, painful as it might be, but it's absolutely foolish to risk the total loss of the rest of your sheep herd portfolio by leaving them unattended in the wilderness, even if they're under the care of some junior sheep herder. It's a bad investment. So too is going through the effort and expense of searching for a single lost coin, spending time and energy and oil for your lamps for what may have been part of a wedding dress where it was decorated by other coins. All of this only to then throw a party more expensive than the value of the coin that was found in the first place. So too is this idea of a father who endured the shame and ridicule and damaged reputation over a wayward and wasteful child, who squandered his inheritance on wild living, who then, this father, not only receives his son back into the household, but welcomes him back as family, and not to the disgrace everyone else, and not as the disgrace everyone else would view him as. This father who then throws an extravagant party despite having lost half of his worth when he gave it away to his rebellious son. There's a ruthless, practical, tough luck ethos in the culture all around Jesus. And so he employs these parables as a critique of their worldview. It's coming on the heels of religious leaders who are criticizing him for the company he keeps. People maybe not unlike the son in that parable. Tax collectors seen as disloyal to God and country, sinners or people who were outcasts and marginalized, sometimes for their choices and sometimes because of the wrong beliefs of the religious elite of their day. The crowd following Jesus was increasingly made up of people who the leaders said weren't worth the effort, not to teach, not to help, not to know or spend time with, people only worth their scorn and judgment. In a word, people who were lost to them. I think some of you might know what that's like. To be so disregarded in the esteem of others that you're essentially lost to them. Judged less by your choices and more by your circumstances. Not being seen as worth the effort of being helped. Much less known or even seen sometimes. And even if some of you here don't know the pain of that kind of diminishment, you know the lostness that derives from estranged relationships, abandoned dreams, deflated hopes, a lost faith. You know the fear that accompanies being lost to draconian policies and weaponized mistreatment and cruel mockery. You know the pain that comes from being forgotten and pushed out and kept down. You know the lived truth that you can't pull yourself up by your bootstraps of shoes you don't own and can't acquire. Feeling lost to the world, to society, to the church can be so demoralizing, dehumanizing, so very defeating. I don't know, maybe we could understand better why it would make someone so desperate for something like their own limb in the wrong hands. This parable of the lost foot looks a lot like Jesus' 3 parables of lost things that we heard read today. You see, John continues to fight for this foot to be returned, and Shannon continues to fight to keep it as his own because he paid for it. But it turns out that John wants his limb returned not just because it was literally his, literally him, but because he always wanted to make it a part of a memorial to his late father, who died in the very same plane crash. The guilt of surviving, the depression, they start to consume him, and he falls back into drug use. And along the way, the 2 men eventually make it to one of those courtroom TV shows where the judge, I think it was Judge Mathis, rules in John's favor, allowing him to reclaim his own lost foot. But he also ordered him to pay $5,000 to Shannon as repayment for the expense of purchasing the storage unit at auction. And then something else happens. The judge then starts to realize that John was actually high during the hearing. And instead of changing his ruling or causing him further legal jeopardy, the judge offers to pay to send John to rehab. As if being seen for the first time in the entire saga, John accepts the offer and he gets sober. Far from an absurd story about a lost foot, the documentary shows what it is to be found. To find his foot, to find his sobriety, to find his dignity and purpose again. These parables today aren't just about the tough luck culture that heaped scorn and abandoned those who were in need. And it's not just about the lost things that are found, a sheep, a coin, a son, a father, an older brother. Undergirding these parables is what they reveal about God. A remarkable kind of God who waives risk and waves off practicality, whose very character is such that she will move heaven and earth to find what is lost. These are not just parables about lost things. They're parables about the finder of lost things. And it's a vision of God that once you've glimpsed it, once you've experienced it for yourself, you can never unsee it. It changes you forever. It changed me. 4 years ago, I was on my way to visit Kelsey, who was still living in Georgia at the time. And I took my dog, Zoe. Some of you knew her. A German Shepherd Lab mix. It didn't quite fit underneath the plain seat in front of me. I was taking her to meet the dog sitter who was going to be keeping her that week. I should have known something was off. Zoe was very uneasy with the dog sitter's boyfriend, but I was in a hurry, and I left her with the young woman and this boyfriend. I actually started to tear up as I drove away. I think a mixture of missing her getting older, and guilt that she was so uneasy. I laid over at LaGuardia a couple hours later, and I was scavenging for a food court when a voicemail popped up on my phone. I started to listen, and my heart fell to the floor. It was from Rover, the dog sitting company that I had used for years. And they said that Zoe was missing. They said the dog sitter alerted them that she ran away, but that I should contact her for more information. I'll be honest, I don't really remember the exact order of what happened next. I just know I went numb and I felt paralyzed, and my mind was doing all the moving, racing until the warmth of my tears jolted me back into the moment. I texted Kelsey simply saying, "Zoe is missing." And she didn't understand. What are you talking about? And I repeated it. Rover called, said Zoe was missing. I tried getting a new flight, but there weren't any more into Worcester that day. They only had flights into Boston that were getting in late that night. A flight to Boston, 11 p.m., no rental cars. And after I booked the flight, I remember just going around the corner and just kind of collapsing on the wall, slumping down and crying. I name that because I've never felt so helpless and desperate. I kept trying to figure out what I could do from so far away, from wherever Zoe was in that moment. I couldn't stop my mind from picturing her scattered away from that man that she was uneasy about, roaming streets she didn't know, perilously close to 290, lost, and maybe forever. I don't remember consciously doing what I'll tell you happened next, but I have text messages and Facebook messages that have reminded me. Feeling so lost myself, I opened up Facebook on my phone and I scrolled to our church Community Voices Facebook group. And I posted, "Urgent, please. I just got a message that Zoe is missing from her dog sitter. Is anyone able to help look for her?" Then I gave the address. Even if I could get a car, I wouldn't be back until after dark, but the flight has me coming in really late. The sitter said she's already been missing for several hours. And then I texted one of my dearest friends, Wesley. I texted the same thing that I had texted to Kelsey, just Zoe's missing. And he was as confused and shocked as she was. Within a few minutes, our friends Joy and Chris, many of you know, had responded to the Facebook post that I wasn't watching. And then they separately texted because they figured I wasn't on Facebook anymore, and they asked if I could make my post public so they could start sharing it with their very wide circle of people in Worcester. And about the same exact time, Wesley responded and said, "What's the address? I'm headed there now." And then Jim replied to the post saying he and Darius and Ariel were on the way. And then Rose said she was on her way. And then Daniel and Colton responded saying they were out there looking for her. And then Jeremiah said he was. And then Stephanie Gaudette. Later, John and Sue Minot replied, maybe the first time they'd ever commented on Facebook before, saying they were on their way to look for her. And then Emily responded, saying, starting near the address where Zoe was last seen, we drove around and looked for a couple hours. Instead of music, we cranked up several of Brent's sermons, so maybe Zoe might hear his voice. Marjorie Klon and her family, Brittany and Jay, Annika and Connor, and so many others, some of you here probably that I haven't named, joined this search party of no fewer than 30 people across the afternoon and into the evening, all looking for a lost dog on behalf of a lost human. She was home the next morning, reunited, both of us found. And there's more to the story I can tell you at some other point. It's a story I never thought I'd share here. Not because it ended badly, but because I didn't know how to share it here in a way that was both true and not self-indulgent. But I've come to believe that the truth is, it isn't just my story or hers. It's also your story. And it's one of the greatest sermons I've ever witnessed, where you put into practice the love that you believe in, the love that has formed and shaped you and ever yet animates and keeps you. It's a sermon I could never preach as well as you did that day. It's the kind of sermon and vision of God we're going to need more of in the days and years to come. So I have to tell you what you already know. Our world is a salvage yard of lost things waiting to be found and reunited and reclaimed and remade. Lost dreams and hopes and faith. Relationships lost to conflicts and conspiracies and cults of personality. Health lost to addictions and stigmas, and an economy that rewards finding and keeping profits over helping losing weeping people. Our world, friends, is teeming with lost things waiting to be found and kept safe. If only more people would be like you. and risk looking foolish enough, wasteful enough, reckless and extravagant enough to reach for people, to help them, and to never stop looking for them. Like God's love that persists and enfolds and never lets us go. That's what you did for me and for Zoe. And it really did change me. It really did change my understanding of God. The world, the church, I think all of us. We need more people like you. People who know somewhere down deep that they are made in the image of the God of lost things. And who, because of that, can't help but become themselves the finders and keepers of lost things. Amen.